15 miles from the Mexican border, and this is how it ends? Captain Dalton Sheffield muttered under his breath as tracer rounds carved red streaks through the pre-dawn haze. His voice was calm, almost eerily so, but the words carried the weight of grim certainty. Around him, jagged rock and dust swallowed sound like a living thing, wrapping the five-man SEAL team in a suffocating silence broken only by the echo of distant gunfire. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe to Courage and Honor, Veterans TV, so you never miss these fascinating tales of courage. And let us know in the comments where you're watching today. The ambush had been perfect, too perfect. The cartel fighters moved with the precision of soldiers, their overlapping fields of fire cutting off every possible retreat. Sheffield's instincts, those battle-honed reflexes that had carried him through 40 operations, screamed that something about this mission had been wrong from the start. He had felt it back at base in the stale air of the briefing room when intelligence analysts described their target as a low-threat narcotics compound. Low threat. He almost laughed at the absurdity of it now. A burst of gunfire raked the rocks above his head. He pressed closer to the cold stone, scanning the canyon's rim through his night vision scope. The mountains rose around them like jagged teeth, trapping the team in a narrow throat of earth where even shadows seemed to conspire. Blackwell. Report. Still covering your east ridge? Captain, came Lieutenant Reed Blackwell's reply. His tone was calm, clipped, the way only men trained for chaos could sound. At 29, Blackwell had the eyes of a man who'd seen too much but refused to let it break him. They called him Ghost because when he worked a rifle, death came silently. Vaughn, status? Charges set, sir. South perimeter, answered Chief Petty Officer Sterling Vaughn, the team's demolition expert. His voice crackled faintly under the strain of jamming interference. Grant, still can't get a clean signal, sir. They're jamming us across multiple bands. Petty Officer Fletcher Grant, their comms wizard from Silicon Valley, was hammering keys with desperate precision. Static hissed through his headset, a reminder that the world beyond the canyon had just vanished. Mitchell? Standing by, Captain. Medkit ready. The medic's tone was quiet, measured. Corporal Wade Mitchell had patched more men back from the edge of death than he cared to count. He knew from the rhythm of the battle that before dawn, he'd be doing it again. They were 5 Americans in a death bowl, surrounded by 30 or more enemy combatants armed with military-grade weapons and coordinated radio chatter. The cartel had never fought like this before. Whoever was out there had training and inside information. Something's off, Sheffield murmured. No guards, no movement, perfect intel. It's like someone handed us the script. He didn't have time to elaborate. Blackwell's low voice cut in again, urgency hidden beneath discipline. Contact Northern Ridge, 15, maybe more. They're spreading in formation, tactical spacing. These bastards know what they're doing. Then came the sound Sheffield dreaded most, the deep guttural growl of diesel engines. From the canyon's mouth below, headlights glared through dust. 3 technical trucks mounting 50 cals and an armored personnel carrier improvised from old military stock. Every route out was sealed. Rally Point Bravo, Sheffield barked. Fall back and hold. The team moved with choreographed precision. Vaughn triggered smoke charges, the explosions blooming white clouds that rolled across the rocks. Mitchell grabbed his trauma pack, slinging it over one shoulder. Grant clutched his comms case, still typing furiously through static. Sheffield reached the outcropping first, a half-moon of stone offering shallow cover and a thin chance at survival. Positions, he ordered. Keep it tight, eyes high. Gunfire erupted like a storm. Sparks spat from the rocks, tracer rounds splitting the dark. The air reeked of burnt powder and iron. For every burst they returned, the cartel answered with twice the volume. These weren't undisciplined gunmen high on adrenaline. These were professionals, calm, coordinated, relentless. The captain's stomach twisted as realization dawned. Someone had studied them. Him. Long enough to know exactly how SEAL Team Alpha moved, thought, and fought. Then came the moment he knew they wouldn't survive. Not without a miracle. Vaughn shouted something over the gunfire, but the words dissolved into static. Mitchell crawled toward a wounded teammate, bullets chewing stone inches from his boots. Grant was yelling into the comms mic, sweat streaking his face. They've got military encryption patterns. I can't break through. Wait. Hold on. And then everything changed. A voice, female. Steady as polished steel, cut through the radio chaos with crystalline clarity. Wraith has eyes on. The 4 words sliced through the static like a command from the heavens. Every man froze for half a heartbeat. The jamming was still active, yet that transmission came through perfectly. It wasn't possible. Sheffield's pulse hammered. He keyed his mic. "Unknown station, identify yourself?" No answer, only the hiss of wind and distant gunfire. Then the voice again, calm and sharp. "Captain Sheffield, you're boxed in. 3-tier formation closing from the north. You've got 8 minutes before they complete the encirclement. Move west 200 meters to your 9 o'clock. Elevated rock shelf, overhead cover, multiple exits." Whoever she was, she knew their coordinates, the enemy's structure, and the terrain better than any satellite recon. Sheffield hesitated only a moment before deciding that trust, even from a ghost, was better than death. "All units move on my signal," he ordered. 200 meters west, go." The team broke from cover, sprinting across open ground as bullets kicked up dust around their boots. Blackwell's rifle cracked again and again, each shot deliberate, covering their movement. Mitchell dragged Vaughn, who'd caught shrapnel in the shoulder but refused to drop his weapon. Behind them, explosions from Vaughn's remote charges lit the canyon like lightning, sending debris and fire into the night. And from somewhere unseen, another rifle began to speak. Cartel spotters fell one by one. Each hit clean, center mass, instant silence. The shooters never saw it coming. Mitchell glanced up mid-run and swore softly. "Somebody's taking them out for us. Keep moving," Sheffield shouted, breath burning in his lungs. They reached the rock shelf just as another volley of enemy fire tore through their former position. He threw himself behind cover, gasping. "Positions. Return fire." "Captain?" The woman's voice came again, unshaken. 3 spotters neutralized. "You've got a 4-minute window before they regroup. Make it count." Sheffield felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Whoever she wasn't guessing. She was watching. "Copy that." "Wraith," he said quietly into his mic. "Let's make it count." Far above them, through her high-powered scope, Charlotte Mercer exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The bullet traveled half a mile and ended another man's life before sound could reach him. Her movements were calm, almost ritualistic as she chambered the next round. For 3 years she had hidden in these mountains, surviving on solitude and silence after the army erased her existence. But tonight, anonymity was a luxury she could no longer afford. The Wraith was back. The first time the bad feeling had crawled up Captain Dalton Sheffield's spine was 3 hours earlier, when the mountains were blue-black and the cold made even his breath sound brittle. He knelt beside a scarred boulder, a ruggedized tablet glowing dimly in his hands, and studied the compound etched in green lines. Everything the intel cell had promised was there: processing sheds, a cinderblock office, a corrugated roof glittering with dew. Everything and nothing extra. That was what bothered him. Real life never matched a briefing so cleanly. "Comms check," he whispered, voice snug in the dark like a blade sheathed in leather. "Blackwell." "Good." Lieutenant Reed Blackwell lay prone on the east ridge. His rifle cuddled into bone, heartbeat slow and steady. Ghost had the patience of a man who could let a target breathe 3 times before deciding which breath would be their last. "Vaughn set," came Chief Petty Officer Sterling Vaughn, south by 30 meters. Palms raw from placing subtle charges. Enough to distract, not enough to level. He could have blown the whole compound to dust and glass. Instead, he'd threaded explosives through the rock like fishing line. "Grant ready." Petty Officer Fletcher Grant lived half inside his keyboard, the other half inside a tangle of antennas. He'd grown up on Silicon Valley talk and midnight coffee, and now he hunted signals with the same hunger kids chased high scores, Mitchell standing by. Corporal Wade Mitchell's med pack looked like it could swallow him whole, but he wore it like a promise. Sheffield lifted his eyes to the canyon walls, steep, narrow, a throat waiting to close. If anything went bad, those walls would become funnels, squeezing movement into kill lanes whose geometry he could already see without drawing a single line. He hated that the satellite shots looked like a diagram. He hated that the place was quiet enough to hear small stones bump into one another, that the perimeter path showed no fresh scuff, and that the thermal images Blackwell relayed, 3, maybe 4 heat signatures, all stationary, made the compound feel like a stage set. "Grant, broaden your net," Sheffield murmured. "Don't just listen to the compound. Listen to who's listening to us," keys ticked. The seconds were long enough to have edges. "Captain." Grant's voice tightened. I'm picking up encrypted traffic on the ridgelines, multiple emitters. Patterns look organized. That's not cartel chatter. That's disciplined. A pause. They're forming a crescent around us. Something inside Sheffield made a quiet decision. The place wasn't wrong because it was messy. It was wrong because it was immaculate. The flaw was the perfection. Blackwell, scan high. He was already moving his men by inches, not to alarm them with the truth already pressing in. Contact, Blackwell breathed. North Ridge. 15 minimum. Spacing is textbook. Captain, these aren't cowboys. Diesel rumble rolled up the canyon like thunder with a heartbeat. Headlights smeared against dust. The slope below spit out 3 trucks with heavy guns and one ugly, homemade beast that only someone with a soldier's imagination would build. Rally Point Bravo, Sheffield snapped, the words a rope thrown to drowning men. The team flowed, no panic, only practice. Vaughn's first smoke charge peeled open like a flower, white petals tumbling downhill. Grant hauled the comms case tight to his chest, still typing as he ran. Mitchell ghosted from shadow to shadow, counting which rocks would be triage tables if the night turned worse. They hit the shelf, a shallow ledge with a stone overbite, and fitted themselves into it. The first volley sandpapered the rock above Sheffield's head. Tracers hummed hot metal bees. "Get me anything, Grant," Sheffield said. "Not please, not now." "Jamming's layered, sir," Grant said, fingers flying. "They're smarter than us by a half step I didn't see coming." It should have ended there, the math unforgiving. 5 against many, every path a problem. But math lost to a voice. Wraith has eyes on. Female. Level. A tone that felt like it had been ironed flat. No creases of fear. It arrived untouched by the jamming that had strangled every other syllable. "Unknown station." "Identify," Sheffield answered out of habit, even as he felt the tactical picture flex and reframe itself around the intrusion. "Captain, your current position is untenable. 3-tier wedge advancing from the north. Encirclement in 8 minutes. Move west 200 meters. Rock shelf with overhead cover and egress options." The voice did not ask permission. It simply put a hand on their backs and pushed. The men moved because the alternative was dying where they lay. Blackwell stitched the ridgeline with 3 shots spaced like a metronome. Somewhere out there, bodies softened into dust. Vaughn's deception charges bloomed behind them. The canyon coughing smoke that pretended the team was still entrenched. As they crossed open ground, an invisible rifle spoke once, twice, clean, chastened thunder. Cartel spotters folded as if strings had been cut. Mitchell, running, muttered, "We're not alone," and nobody argued. They slid under the shelf Wraith had promised. It fit like it had been measured for them. 3 spotters neutralized, the voice said, almost conversational. "Windows 4 minutes. They'll adapt. Use it." Sheffield had heard rumors in briefing rooms that smelled of coffee and wet wool, murmurs of a ghost operator. A whisper call sign. A woman the system had exiled who somehow kept saving men who'd never see her face. He hadn't believed in ghosts. He believed stubbornly in training, logistics, and the small, stubborn miracles of good men under fire. But belief doesn't argue with reality. It salutes it. "Copy, Wraith," he said, surprising himself with the name. "Blackwell, take her calls." "Roger," Blackwell replied, eyes to glass. 2 o'clock, 200, the voice said. Vest-mounted radio hand signals, "He's a coordinator." "Take him." Blackwell adjusted for a fickle wind threading the canyon and squeezed. The man crumpled mid-gesture, his subordinates blinking like someone had killed the sun and forgotten to warn them. Coordination slackened. Lines frayed. A few men shifted independently instead of together. A small thing, a precious thing. On the ledge, Grant finally snagged a thin slice of sky in the thick of jamming. His hands trembled with relief as he spat their coordinates into the crackling void. The reply was 3 clipped syllables and a promise of rotor blades. "Connection dropped," he said, panting. But it was enough. "Air's coming. On your left," Wraith said. "Crew-served gun setting on a tripod, 400 and change. He finds your shelf, you're pinned." "Copy." Blackwell's shot broke, the world pausing a half-second to make room for consequence. Then the heavy gunner slumped over his own hardware and the night resumed. Vaughn, pale and bleeding through his sleeve, caught Sheffield's eye. "Whoever she is, boss, she's here," Sheffield said. "That's enough." A strange rhythm took hold. Wraith named, Blackwell judged, the rifle answered. Between those beats, the team breathed and drank water and counted ammunition in their heads. Mitchell shifted tourniquets, his hands efficient and tender, while the world tried to unmake itself around him. Grant listened for the sky, ignoring the violent music of impacts on stone. And somewhere out beyond even their best line of sight, Charlotte Mercer moved. Her body knew the dance of fire and relocation: shoot, slide, breathe, count, move. She shifted 30 meters, then 20 more, never giving counter-snipers the same silhouette twice. Her mind tracked priorities the way chess masters hold boards inside their heads. Which piece to remove so the others tremble? Which voice to silence so the chorus forgets its melody? She had promised herself anonymity. She had carved a life from quiet things: fence lines, winter stars, coffee steam, boot prints fading by noon. But the oath she kept was older and louder than quiet. It had her father's timbre, roughened by years and loyalty. You don't walk away when you can help. Repositioning for envelope, she said, breath even. In 3 minutes they'll break cover here and here. She gave bearings as if she'd designed the canyon. They did exactly that. Men surged, confused into boldness, and were punished for it. Others stalled too long in the open and fear laid hands on them. The fight stopped being a siege and became a lesson with a very hard teacher. Movement withdrawing from advanced positions, Mitchell reported softly, surprised by the gentleness in his own voice. They're quitting the push, Vaughn said, half disbelieving. Smoke braided overhead where one of his decoys still burned, pretending bravado on their behalf. Enemy conceding ground, Sheffield said into his mic. Not because he needed the record, but because saying it made it more real. He didn't stand. He didn't tempt fate. He just let the truth sit between them like a coiled spring, relaxing. Hold until your birds are inbound, Wraith said. I'm here. He nearly asked her who she was, where she was, how she'd torn open their sealed night with a voice that sounded like a path appearing under a lost man's feet. He didn't. He had learned long ago that some answers cost more than they paid. The first hint of salvation was not the rotors, those came later, but the change in how the canyon sounded. Gunfire lost its eagerness. Shouts thinned. Somewhere a truck turned and ground its way downhill, gears biting stone. The enemy still owned the altitude, but not the will. When the helicopters finally punched through the dark, the air itself shifted. The beat was a heartbeat you could feel in your teeth. Dust exploded into cyclones around the landing zone, flares hissing to life as if the night were giving itself up in stages. Wraith, Sheffield said, almost private on a very public channel. What's your plan for extraction? A pause, as if she were measuring how much of herself to leave behind. Negative on extraction, she said, and the finality in it was a door closing quietly. Take care of your team. He wanted to say thank you and found the word too small. He wanted to offer a promise and realized she'd asked for none. They boarded under the rotor wash, Gar Ant clutching the comms case like a relic, Vaughn stifling a hiss as Mitchell taped down fresh gauze. Blackwell took one last glance at the ridgeline, curious and respectful, as if a saint might be standing there. As the birds lifted, Sheffield looked back at the shelf where dust and brass told the story of 24 very bad minutes. The canyon shrank, then scaled, then folded into the map in his mind. Somewhere far off, a woman broke down a rifle piece by piece like a prayer said backwards, unmaking the night until it was only morning again. He didn't know her name. He knew what she had chosen. That was enough for now. When the mountain quiet finally returned, Charlotte Mercer was already moving. The canyon below still flickered with dying firelight, smoke winding through broken pines, flares sputtering to embers. She had just saved 6 lives, but her pulse refused to slow. Even after years away from combat, her body remembered the aftermath, the tremor that came when danger ended but refused to admit it was gone. She crouched beside a granite ledge, stripping her rifle down with ritual precision. The rifle was custom. Her father's old gift rebuilt from a precision chassis and field-tested scopes that weren't supposed to exist in civilian hands. One by one, the pieces vanished into a hard case cushioned with worn leather. The axe steadied her. Cleaning, packing, disappearing. It was the only liturgy she trusted anymore. Her truck was parked 2 ridges west under a camouflage tarp of netting and brush. The hike back would take 90 minutes through country that could chew a lesser person alive. Charlotte knew every switchback, every hidden cut of stone. She'd learned the rhythm of this wilderness the way monks learn prayer. Not from love alone, but from survival. It was her refuge now, and her punishment. As dawn began teasing light over the eastern peaks, she reached the service road, A narrow ribbon of dust slashed into the hillside. Her boots crunched the gravel rhythmically. She kept her breathing measured. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, leaving the same hollow space that followed every firefight. The space where silence grew teeth. At the truck, she peeled off her gloves and sat for a moment behind the wheel before starting the engine. Her hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from release. The steering wheel felt too small, too civilian for what she'd just done. The drive down the valley stretched empty and colorless. She passed rusted mailboxes, fences swallowed by sage, the occasional lone steer gazing at nothing. To anyone watching, she was just another wilderness guide heading home after a long night in the backcountry. But inside her chest, war still echoed. 3 years earlier, Charlotte had left these mountains in uniform. She had returned in disgrace. At 28, she'd been the Army's most promising female sniper instructor. Her students called her Hawk. She broke range records that made the colonels nervous and the sergeants whisper that maybe, just maybe, the system was changing. Then she'd walked into a supply room at Fort Benning and found a senior officer, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Holland, pressing, a terrified specialist, against the wall. Charlotte's instincts had never been to hesitate. The report she filed was clear, clinical, truthful, and lethal to her career. The system she had believed in didn't break to protect her. It broke her to protect itself. The court-martial evaporated into administrative inquiry. Holland retired with full benefits. Charlotte was charged with insubordination, failure to maintain military bearing, and conduct unbecoming. By the time the paperwork cleared, her name had been erased from every active roster. The Army had pretended she never existed. Walter Mercer, her father, a retired Ranger Master Sergeant with 30 years in uniform, had told her quietly, "When they take your name, they think they take your worth. Don't let them be right," so she'd come home, back to the family ranch in Tyket Valley, California, where the hills ran down to the border and the nights smelled of dust and juniper. Her days became predictable, guiding tourists through weekend hikes, patching fences, keeping her mind busy enough to quiet the tremors that came when memories woke her at 3 a.m. Until tonight. When she'd intercepted the SEAL distress call, her first thought had been disbelief. The encryption code was top tier, impossible to access without special clearance, but her father's old contacts had left her with equipment that was anything but standard issue. Listening in had felt like eavesdropping on a world she no longer belonged to. Then she'd heard the panic beneath their professionalism, the subtle change in a commander's tone when he realizes the map has lied to him, and she couldn't ignore it. Wraith had been a name whispered years ago during training, exercises, an urban legend among Rangers and SEALs. Some said she was a ghost. Others said she was the embodiment of what the military refused to acknowledge, a woman as dangerous and disciplined as any man the system produced. Now, she had become the myth. The truck rattled into the ranch yard, tires spitting gravel. The sunrise painted the fence posts amber. She killed the engine, sat for a moment, and listened. Horses rustled in the paddock. Somewhere inside the house, a coffee pot gurgled. Her father was awake, same as always. Walter Mercer stepped out onto the porch wearing a flannel shirt and fatigue trousers that still looked like they remembered war. His face was carved by both weather and discipline. He didn't need to ask. The look in his daughter's eyes told him enough. "You were out," he said. Not a question. Charlotte dropped her pack beside the steps. "Yeah." He studied her a long moment, as if measuring which part of her was still his little girl, and which part had been forged by a world that took everything from her. "Bad?" "Worse than bad," she answered. "An ambush SEAL team. 15 miles south near Sierra Madre Ridge. Somebody sold them out. They were dead before they started. Until I stepped in." Walter's hand stilled on the coffee mug. "You broke radio silence?" "I did." Her voice was steady, not defensive. "They'd have been wiped out." He exhaled through his nose, a sound that carried both pride and grief. "You know they'll come for answers. What you did tonight doesn't disappear." "I know." She folded her arms, gaze lifting toward the ridgeline where the sky was starting to brighten. "I'm done hiding from what I am, Dad. If they want to charge me, fine. Let them explain to 6 families why their sons are alive because of a ghost the Army threw away." For a moment, he said nothing. Then he smiled, soft and sad. "Your mother would have said the same thing." Charlotte's throat tightened. "Yeah," she whispered. She would have stayed until everyone else got out. Walter nodded slowly. She did. That truth hung between them, the story both of them carried like a scar. Her mother, Sarah Mercer, had been an army nurse in Somalia, killed in a hospital bombing because she refused to abandon the wounded. Courage wasn't a word in their house. It was inheritance. Walter reached out, resting his calloused hand on her shoulder. You did right, Charlie, even if they can't admit it yet. Charlotte looked toward the mountains again. Somewhere up there lay the scar of last night, the spent casings, the blackened trucks, the ghosts of men who wouldn't be going home. I hope that's enough, she said quietly. Right and enough aren't always the same thing, Walter murmured, his eyes narrowing toward the horizon. But they're all a soldier ever really has. By afternoon, the heat came rolling off the sand like invisible fire. Charlotte found herself at the Border Fox Diner in town, the same place she'd been working part-time since the ranger business slowed. The neon sign buzzed above the door, half-lit as country music sighed through dusty speakers. She wore a faded apron and a practiced smile. Coffee, Sheriff? She asked, sliding a mug across the counter. Sheriff Tom Bradley, broad shoulders, Marine Corps pin on his collar, nodded. Sure thing, Miss Mercer. He gave her that sideways look old cops give when their instincts twitch. You hear anything strange up in the mountains last night? Border Patrol's been chattering about gunfire near Sierra Madre. She didn't blink. Coyotes get loud this time of year. He chuckled, not convinced, but not pushing. Coyotes with 50 cals, maybe. Charlotte poured the coffee anyway. Sound carries funny in those canyons. Bradley studied her a moment longer, then smiled faintly. Yeah, I guess it does. When he left, the diner's doorbell tinkled once, and she let the mask slip. Her shoulders sagged. The caffeine in the air suddenly made her stomach churn. She pressed a palm to the counter, grounding herself. Outside, the world looked ordinary again. But she knew better. Somewhere, uniformed men were already asking the same questions. Who was Wraith? How did she break through jamming protocols? And how did she shoot like that? By tomorrow, her name would be on a file, and someone somewhere would come knocking. She straightened, forced her breathing even, and went back to pouring coffee. The day would go on. But the quiet life she'd built, carefully, deliberately, painfully, was already over. The knock came 3 mornings later. Firm, official, impossible to mistake. Charlotte was splitting firewood by the barn, sweat beading along her hairline despite the cool dawn air. She paused mid-swing as a black sedan crunched up the long dirt drive, twin plumes of dust unfurling behind it. Even from 50 yards away, she could feel the weight of authority. 2 men stepped out, pressed uniforms, polished boots, clipped movements. They weren't locals. Ms. Mercer? The senior officer's voice was polite but hollow, like he was reading from a script. We're here to escort you to Naval Amphibious Base Coronado for a security debrief. He didn't say arrest, and she noticed that, how the word danced just out of reach. Charlotte set down the splitting maul. Her heart thudded once solid. Am I being charged? You're being asked to participate in an operational review as a potential witness, the junior officer replied, tablet in hand. Colonel Kimball requests your presence at 1400 hours. She nodded once. Give me 20 minutes to clean up and tell my father. They waited by the car, hands behind their backs, eyes politely anywhere but on her, as she wiped the sawdust and sweat from her arms and went inside. Walter was at the kitchen table reading the San Diego Union Tribune, glasses low on his nose. He didn't look up until she spoke. They're here, she said simply. He folded the newspaper slowly. You knew they would be. I did. Walter studied her face. You're going to tell them the truth? Charlotte gave a dry laugh. What else is left to tell? Outside, the officers didn't hurry her. That small mercy told her they weren't sure what she was yet, a hero, a threat, or both. She hugged her father at the porch steps, and he held on longer than usual. Whatever happens in that room, he murmured. Remember, you did what was right when no one else could. I'll try to make them see that, she said. The drive to Coronado took an hour and a half. The coastline blurred past, blue and gold and too calm for the storm rolling through her chest. Neither officer spoke. Charlotte used the silence to armor herself, steadying her breathing, rehearsing the truth in her mind. When they reached the main gate, the Marine Guard's eyes widened slightly as he checked the orders. Clearance verified, he said. But Charlotte caught the hesitation. The unspoken question of why a civilian woman merited this level of security. Inside the base, everything was sterile steel and glass. The building they led her into smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee that had burned an hour too long. The conference room they ushered her into was designed for intimidation. Chrome chairs, glaring lights, no windows. At the head of the table sat Colonel Harrison Kimball, a man whose lined face carried decades of command decisions. To his right, a woman in a crisp Navy uniform, Captain Lillian Bradford, Intelligence Division. Near the door, arms crossed like a sentry statue, stood Master Sergeant Milton Garrett. His eyes flicked over Charlotte with visible skepticism, as if she'd arrived uninvited to a world that didn't believe she belonged. "Ms. Mercer," Kimball began, his voice a practiced mix of civility and weight. "Thank you for coming. We have some questions regarding activities in the Sierra Madre region, early morning of November 6th. Charlotte took a seat opposite him, folding her hands calmly. "Then let's get started." Captain Bradford slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos, satellite shots, thermal scans, ballistic analyses. She didn't need to look closely. She recognized her handiwork. "Ms. Mercer," Bradford said, her tone even but edged with curiosity. "We have ballistic evidence linking precision rifle fire from elevated positions to an area within 5 miles of your family's property. Voice analysis matches radio transmissions from the call sign Wraith to archived recordings from your service record." "So you already know what you came to ask?" Charlotte replied quietly. Kimball steepled his fingers. "We know 6 operators lived because of someone who shouldn't have been there." "Then maybe you should start by asking why your men were ambushed at all," she shot back. "Your intelligence failed them." "I didn't," the room chilled. Garrett's jaw tightened. "You had no authorization to interfere in a classified operation," he said. She met his glare without flinching. "Authorization didn't save them. Someone had to." Kimball raised a hand before the tension snapped. "Ms. Mercer, our concern is understanding how you acquired these capabilities. Your record shows standard sniper qualifications, but nothing explaining the level of training Captain Sheffield's team reported." Charlotte exhaled slowly. She'd rehearsed this answer the whole drive. "My father taught me everything the Army refused to. He spent 30 years as a ranger. When the system said I wasn't fit for the same education as my brothers in arms, he gave it to me anyway. Off the books. In the field. Real training." Bradford's pen stopped moving. She looked up, her eyes unreadable. "So your father conducted unsanctioned instruction in classified tactics?" Charlotte didn't blink. "He trained his daughter to survive, to serve. You can label it however you want." For the first time, something flickered across Kimball's face. Not anger, but recognition. Maybe even respect. He nodded slightly. "And when you heard the SEAL distress call?" "I listened. I realized someone had fed the cartel your playbook. Those men were walking into a kill box. I had the equipment and the range, so I acted." "Why?" Bradford asked softly. Charlotte hesitated. The question was too human to dodge. "Because they swore the same oath I did. Doesn't matter if they erased my name from the roster. I remember what that oath means." Garrett shifted again, clearly uncomfortable. "You compromised military radio frequencies. I cut through jamming no one else could," she countered. "If that's a crime, you'll have to arrest your own IT division too." Bradford's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Captain Sheffield describes your assistance as the decisive factor in his team's survival." "I'm not interested in credit," Charlotte said. "Just in not pretending it didn't happen." The door opened then, and Sheffield himself entered. Sunburned face, uniform still creased from deployment. He looked directly at her, recognition dawning. "That's her," he said simply, voice low. "She's Wraith." Kimball gestured to a chair. "Captain Sheffield, please. We'd like your assessment." He sat, glanced around the table, then back at Charlotte. "Colonel, my team should be dead. Whoever she is, she saved 6 American lives. Period." Garrett scoffed. "Captain, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence." Sheffield's gaze hardened. "Evidence? Try precision fire under total calm blackout. Try guidance so accurate it felt like she had eyes on every one of us. I don't care what rule book she broke. She's the reason I'm sitting here and not zipped in a bag." Silence. Even Bradford didn't take notes. Kimball folded his hands again. "Ms. Mercer, one last question. If the system had treated you fairly, If you'd still been in uniform, would you have done anything differently? Charlotte looked him in the eye. No, sir, because Wright doesn't need permission. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Kimball stood, gathering the files. This discussion will continue at higher levels. For now, you're free to go, but stay available for contact. Garrett opened the door stiffly. Charlotte rose, straightened her jacket, and gave a short nod to Bradford, who looked almost apologetic. Ms. Mercer, Bradford said quietly as Charlotte passed. Some of us recognize what you did. The rest will catch up eventually. Outside, the ocean wind hit her face, salt and sharp and clean. For the first time in years, she didn't feel erased. Inside that steel room, they'd tried to remind her she didn't belong, but she had left behind proof that she did. Back at Mercer Ranch that evening, Walter was on the porch when she arrived. He didn't ask for details. Her face told the story. They know everything, she said simply, sitting beside him, and now they'll decide what to do with it. They can't bury the truth forever, Walter murmured. They can try. She watched the last light fade behind the ridgeline. But they'll have to dig deep. The crickets started their evening chorus. Somewhere beyond the horizon, command rooms buzzed with arguments about regulation and redemption. But here, in the quiet place where honesty had always lived, Charlotte let herself breathe. Tomorrow, there would be headlines, questions, maybe consequences. Tonight, there was just the sound of wind through cedar trees and her father beside her. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like a ghost. By the following week, her name was everywhere she never wanted it to be. Classified briefings, whispered conversations, encrypted emails passed across the Pentagon at midnight. Some called her a rogue. Others called her a hero. Charlotte Mercer didn't read any of it. She spent those mornings at the ranch, stacking wood, tightening wire, doing the small, quiet work that kept her sane. The noise of Washington could rage all it wanted. She had mountains for company, but far away in the capital, decisions were being made that would soon arrive at her door. At the Pentagon, General Agnes Thornton stood before a conference table full of brass. Her voice was calm, commanding, and tired in the way of those who had fought too many bureaucratic battles. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, the Mercer situation is not going away. We can either punish an operator who saved 6 of our own, or admit that our institutions failed her years ago. How we respond will define whether this military values results or reputation. Admiral Carlson of Naval Special Warfare leaned back, fingers tapping on the folder stamped top secret. General, she acted outside every chain of command. We can't just look away. Thornton shot him a cool glance. Then tell me, Admiral, which of your operators would you prefer to write condolence letters for instead? A silence settled across the room. The men in uniform shifted, uncomfortable not with her logic but with the truth buried in it. They had trained generations of soldiers to act decisively in impossible situations, then punished one for doing exactly that, because she was a woman, and because acknowledging her would mean admitting that their system was flawed. After a moment, Thornton spoke again. You've all read Captain Sheffield's testimony. The SEAL team's survival isn't up for debate. What's on the table is how we respond. Do we make her a cautionary tale or do we correct a mistake? No one answered, but before the meeting adjourned, she placed her pen down with finality. My recommendation, restore her commission. If we can't find the courage to reward integrity and competence, then we don't deserve to wear these uniforms. Back in Tecate Valley, Charlotte tried not to hope. She'd been through too many reviews, hearings, and false promises to believe redemption could come from the same hands that erased her. But when the black SUV returned, different faces this time, her father was already standing on the porch. He met her eyes with something close to a smile. This one's not for arrest, he said. The envelope they handed her was thick, sealed with wax and formality. Inside, the words felt heavier than their paper. Effective immediately, Charlotte Mercer is reinstated under a direct commission to the United States Army Reserve at the rank of captain. This appointment acknowledges exceptional service and capabilities demonstrated in the Sierra Madre engagement and recognizes that previous administrative actions failed to reflect actual performance and conduct. Charlotte read it twice before her eyes blurred. For a long time, she didn't move. Walter rested a steady hand on her shoulder. They're giving you back what they took. Not everything, she murmured, voice unsteady, but enough to finish what I started. Attached was a personal note handwritten from General Thornton herself. "Captain Mercer, you exposed what was broken in us. Now I need you to help fix it. You'll report to Fort Bragg in 30 days to develop new training protocols for unconventional operators, those with skills our current system overlooks. The work won't be easy, but neither was what you've survived." Charlotte closed the letter. "They want me to build something new," she said quietly. Walter nodded, pride and worry mixed in his eyes. "Then build it right." Fort Bragg, 6 months later. The new program didn't look like any military classroom before it. The recruits ranged from bruised veterans to analysts who had never fired a rifle, but could read satellite data like scripture. They weren't chosen for perfect records. They were chosen for potential the old system missed. Charlotte walked among them in a plain instructor's uniform, sleeves rolled, boots dusty. Beside her was Lieutenant Rachel Dorsey, one of the first women to graduate top of her Ranger class. On the other side, Sergeant Major Milton Garrett, yes, that Garrett, now serving as her senior advisor. His first words to her had been blunt. "You proved me wrong, Captain. I figured the least I could do was help you make me proud." And he had. The man who once dismissed her now trained under her command, his voice booming across the range as he barked orders to recruits learning to blend intellect and instinct. They called the facility the Unconventional Warfare Development Center. Inside its steel walls, soldiers learned more than how to fight. They learned to think, adapt, disobey smartly when the mission demanded it. When reporters came to observe, Charlotte refused interviews. "This isn't about me," she said simply. "It's about not wasting talent." Her students, though, knew who she was. They'd heard the story whispered in barracks, the woman called Wraith who saved a SEAL team from annihilation and forced the Pentagon to admit the truth. That courage isn't bound by regulation. 18 months later, the program's first graduates stood in formation beneath a Carolina sunrise. Charlotte, now promoted to lieutenant colonel, watched them with quiet pride. General Thornton's voice carried across the parade ground. "These men and women represent the next generation of America's special operations. They are proof that excellence does not conform. It evolves." Captain Dalton Sheffield stood beside her, a guest of honor in dress blues. "Never thought I'd see the day," he said softly. "Neither did I," she replied. He gave a half smile. "Guess ghosts can't stay buried forever." When the ceremony ended, applause rippling like wind through flags, Charlotte lingered alone at the edge of the field. She could hear the recruits laughing, the hum of a future she had helped create. For the first time in years, she let herself feel peace. Not the fragile kind that breaks under memory, but the solid kind earned through pain endured and lessons learned. Walter was there too, standing quietly under the shade of a pine. "Your mother would have been proud," he said when she joined him. Charlotte smiled faintly. "She'd have told me not to get complacent," he chuckled. "Then keep proving her right." That night she climbed a small ridge behind the base where the stars burned sharp above the trees. The air smelled of dust and gun oil and possibility. She thought about the canyon, the smoke, the fire, the voice she'd once sent into the void. The myth of Wraith had started as a whisper, a rumor passed among men who owed their lives to an unseen savior. Now it had become something bigger, a reminder that integrity once lost could still be reclaimed, and that courage wasn't a rank or gender or clearance level. It was a choice. She closed her eyes and listened to the silence that had once felt like exile, but now felt like belonging. Somewhere out there, new operators were training, new women and men learning that heroism sometimes lives in defiance. She smiled to herself. "You can rest now, Wraith," she whispered into the dark. "They finally see you." The wind moved through the pines, carrying the words down into the valley, where tomorrow's recruits would rise with the sun and begin again. Up next, 2 more incredible stories of courage and redemption are waiting for you. If you've been inspired by Charlotte Mercer's journey, subscribe to Courage and Honor, Veterans TV, and join us tomorrow for another untold story of valor.